Before the green and white hoops conquered Europe, before the Lisbon Lions roared in Portugal, before the songs of You'll Never Walk Alone shook Celtic Park, there was hunger, there was hardship, and there was a community in the east end of Glasgow forged by Irish immigrants fleeing one of the darkest chapters in their history. In 1887, an Irish mayor's brother named Walfrid turned football into a lifeline, founding Celtic Football Club to feed the poor. What followed is a story of identity, rivalry, and glory. From early league triumphs to European immortality, to the fierce fires of the old firm, to the modern era's troubles, today we trace the journey of the Bhoys, a club that has never been just about football. I am Cristian Potalias, and this is History Football Club, where every badge tells a story. Hello everyone, once again Christian here, and today we're going to be talking about Celtic Football Club. And once again, we want to ask everybody, if you like this show, if you like what we're doing here at History Football Club, to go ahead and like and subscribe on the Spotify channel. Make sure you follow there, and make sure you give us a review if you like this. And also, this is going to be spread out by word of mouth. So if you like this product, if you like the stories that you hear, if you like the history behind everything, go ahead and share this with a friend, a family member, or whoever you think would love to hear stories like this. But once again, I appreciate everyone tuning in week in and week out. And here we go. Let's talk about Celtic Football Club. Even though Celtic Football Club was founded in 1887, the story of the Bhoys, as they are known, starts way before that. So let's turn the clock back a little bit. So the year is 1845, and in Ireland faces one of the worst famines in their history, what historians now call the Great Famine, or the Irish Potato Famine, which lasted from 1845 to 1852. Potatoes was one of the main sources of not only food, but financial gain for a lot of people in Ireland. And unfortunately, a lot of that potato will get infected, and their crops for multiple years will be lost, leading to a period of mass starvation and disease for the country. Some experts estimate that around 1 million Irish nationals died and another million immigrated to different countries around the world. A lot of those who migrated ended up in Scotland, especially in the east end of Glasgow. With the stage kind of set now is time to actually meet the founder, the person that actually put all the wheels to work, which is going to be Brother Walfrid. In November 6 of 1887, Irish mayorist Brother Walfrid saw the poor and neglected Irish Scot population of the East End of Glasgow and wanted to help the community through his charity, the Poor's Children's Dinner Table. So he decided to follow the footsteps of Hibernian FC, who was founded 2 years prior by also Irish immigrants in the city of Edinburgh, in order to raise funds. So Brother Walfrid held a meeting at St. Mary's Church in the East Rose Street, today is actually known as Forbes Street. And by the end of the meeting, Celtic FC came to life, and as we know it, the rest is history. So just a kind of little side note, the Maris Brothers is a Catholic organization that basically emphasizes on building men that would educate young people, especially those most neglected. You're going to hear this Irish Marist, the group that Brother Walfrid kind of belonged to. So this is the type of people that he was associated with, or, the type of branch of Catholic faith or religion that he was in. On May 28, 1888, the first official match of Celtic was actually against Rangers, with a 5-2 victory for Celtic, which people said it was a friendly encounter, quote unquote. The reason for the quotes is because we're going to talk about this. This is actually what will be known as the Old Firm, and we will see how this friendly encounter between these two actually becomes to be a rare sight as of today. In 1889, Celtic got their first final, the final of the Scottish Cup, in their first season taking part of the competition. They lost that match 2-1 to Third Lanark. Also, just a little side note, there's going to be a lot of names that maybe I mispronounced, so you guys can correct me, and hopefully, you give me a little bit of grace. when it comes to reading some of these names. So we're moving forward actually to 1892. Celtic would reach final once more, and this time they defeated Queen's Park 5-1. This was the club's first major honor, their first trophy in 1892. And listen to this, one of 7 clubs to have won over 100 trophies. So actually, as of 2025, they have won 120 trophies, and it's crazy that their legacy of lifting trophies and of this honor, I guess we could see it of winning, would actually start in 1892, a while back, and is actually the most cups of any European club. All the other clubs are kind of spread out around the world, in Asia and Egypt, to be more specific. But this actually is the most winningest, I guess we could say, club in Europe. A few months later, after that win, they would move to their new ground, Celtic Park, in which they played until this day. In the next season, they won the Scottish League Championship for the first time. In 1897, the club appointed Willie Malley as their first secretary manager, and only 10 years into their history, the first club legend would be born. But actually, the story of Willie and Celtic wouldn't start there. It would actually start 8 years prior to this. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about Willie Malley. William Patrick Malley was born in Newberry Barracks, County Down, Ireland, in April 25, 1868. He was the third son of Thomas Malley and Mary Montgomery. Willie's dad was a sergeant in the British Army, and a year later after his birth, Mr. Malley moved the entire family to Carthart. At that time, a village just south of Glasgow. Nowadays is actually just kind of part of Glasgow, so a lot of cities in the United States, they have suburbs, of what we call them. I guess today we could say that Cathcart could be a suburb of Glasgow as well. So as a player, as a young man, he in 1886, Willie Malley played a few games for Carthart Hasselbank Juniors and later on Third Lanark, who was one of the founding clubs of the Scottish Football Association in 1872 and the Scottish Football Leagues in 1890. On December of 1887, on a visit to Cathcart, I should have probably looked it up, by Brother Walfrid to invite Tom Malley, the brother of Willie. And since, he was there too, since Willie was there, not only did Brother Walfrid invite Tom Malley to take care, to be part of this new club that, Brother Walfrid was forming, but he was like, you know what? Hey, bring your brother, Tom, bring Willie along. So he invited both of them to go play for Celtic, this new institution that he was starting. In 1888, Willie Malley signed for Celtic and became one of the first players for the club, and he was a midfielder. In 1896, he had one appearance for Manchester City in a second division match against Loughborough. Due to his Scottish heritage and having lived in Scotland since the age of 1, Malley was called up to the Scottish national team, where he only played 2 games in 1893, and one against England and one against Ireland. As a manager, in 1897, Celtic became a private limited company and appointed Willie at 29 years of age as the first quote-unquote secretary manager, where he would win the Scottish League Championship in his first full season as a manager. But Willie Malley had an interesting way of doing things. For example, he actually never worked with his players during training. He would watch from the director's box, or from a press box, or I guess a room, somewhere different. And he would actually never be part of team talks or even talk to them during halftime or post-match. The interesting dynamic, of especially nowadays that we see, head coaches being so involved and, sometimes even in the lives of players. But, Willie had a different approach. So interesting to kind of see how some people, dealt with, this pressure or, being in charge of a team. He actually wouldn't even announce the team to them. The players actually find out about the lineup reading the newspaper. So imagine how crazy that is. When I first read this, honestly, it just kind of blew my mind. It's crazy to think that, the players it kind of goes like in my head. It goes like into a play. There was a movie that I saw once that they were trying out for a play. I think it was like, it might have been like a high school. It might have been High School Music. I really don't know. But the actors, and the people trying out for different parts and positions of a play wouldn't find out until a list would be posted on the door, and that's when they knew, if they had gotten the role or not. But I think it's funny to think that the players didn't know who would start the game until the newspaper, basically gave the starting lineup. So that's an interesting way to kind of, conduct a team or conduct the way that he did business. Another big change was the way that he actually composed the team. Celtic was known as a buying club who would heavily spend and bring in professionals to play for the club, but Malley, he decided to actually get rid of that practice and would rely mostly on recruiting youngsters straight from the junior football. So junior football wasn't really referring to the younger age of the players, but to the level, football being played in that division. So for example, if you're into the Premier League, think about, the Championship, or think about just a level less or a level under, the professional level or Division 1 level. A lot of people, or at least I myself, I did some digging. I was like, junior football, like, is he kind of bringing up kids from an academy type thing? And no, even though they maybe had an academy at that point, he just went for, he looked at the younger players in the younger divisions to kind of bring them up, build them up, and put them as in the first team. Malley would put together a team that would win 6 league titles in a row from 1905 to 1910. They won their first Scottish League and the Scottish Cup doubles. That record of 6 in a row would actually remain unbroken till the 1960s. Later on, he would revamp the team with younger players once again, which included names like Patsy Gallagher and the ageless, as they call him, Jimmy McMenemy. They won 4 league titles between 1914 and 1917, and they would establish a United Kingdom record for an unbeaten run in a professional football. 62 games, 49 won, 13 draw from November 1915 to April 1917, which actually stood until it was broken by another Celtic squad, Brendan Rodgers Celtic, in November of 2017, literally 100 years later. Imagine talking about holding titles, talk about, being record breakers in a way, and having that much level of play that it literally took a team 100 years to beat your record of 62 games unbeaten. So that's insane. It's also insane that another Celtic, team or squad, was the one to actually break that record. He won 2 more titles in 1919 and then in 1922, won more trophies in the 20s, and then in the 30s, he would build another great team, a team that featured Jimmy Delaney and Jimmy McGrory, who scored actually 550 goals in 547 games, a British goal-scoring record till this day, actually. Kind of crazy that Mr. Jimmy McGrory still holds a record. They won again in 1936 and in 1938, and then the Scottish Cup in 1937. And unfortunately, as Malley was reaching his 70s, the team dipped in performance, and in February of 1940, Malley actually decided to retire from his managerial position. He retired after serving 43 years as manager, with the title of the longest-serving manager in Celtic history. Malley is the 5th most decorated manager of all time. He won 16 Scottish League championships, 14 Scottish Cups, 14 Glasgow Cups, and 19 Glasgow Charity Cups. And he was inducted in the Scottish Hall of Fame in 2009, so a little bit closer to this time. He's actually attributed to have coined the famous Celtic motto, "It is not his creed nor his nationality which counts, it is the man himself," in reference to the religious ideals that people have attributed to Celtic and to the idea that they would only have Catholic players. So now, let's get back to Celtic. That was a little bit about Malley, but let's go back to the boys. So after Malley retired, Jimmy McStay took over in February of 1940. He spent 5 years in the role, but then, this major little event in the world happened, World War II. So there was actually no official competitive league taking place during those years. Both the Scottish Football League and the Scottish Cup were suspended and regional leagues were set up. The only competition Celtic won during the war times was one-off match against Queen's Park named Victory in Europe Cup to celebrate, Victory in Europe Day, which celebrated, Germany unconditionally surrendering from the war or in the war. Random fact, they won by the number of corners. So funny enough, back in the day, the teams would, if they tied, they would actually give the title to the team that had the most corner kicks. But listen to this quote by the CelticStart.com. I got a lot of information from those guys over there. So if you want to know a little bit more history about, Celtic, you can check out the CelticStart.com. Let me read this quote for you so you can kind of get an idea of what was going on in that game. Quote, as full-time approached, there were no further goals scored. It looked likely that the final would have been settled with the toss of a coin, which was common practice in those days for tied matches. However, there was one final twist. With just 1 minute remaining, Celtic won a corner thanks to the efforts of MacPhail and Patton. Before the coin toss would be used, the number of corner kicks won was the decider. Therefore, with this being the only corner of the game, the Celts were the winners. Soccer has evolved so much and is crazy. Imagine deciding the game by corner kicks. It's kind of crazy to think that, at one point, it was a coin toss, and then before it came to that, they would look at different stats. You know how now we have goal differentials and stuff like that. And back in the day, they would look at the number of corners, and they all, the whole entire game had one corner, and they won a trophy because of that corner. So very crazy. Ex-player and captain Jimmy McGrory would actually become the manager in 1945. In 1953, Celtic would win the Coronation Cup as a one-off tournament played against Arsenal, Manchester United, and Hibernian. It was to commemorate the coronation of Elizabeth II. In 1954, they would win another double, the league and the cup. Let me trickle back a little bit, going back to 1953. Elizabeth II, she was the one that passed away a couple of years ago, I think 1 or 2 years ago. So isn't that crazy that Celtic won a title basically announcing her coronation, and now, I don't know. I thought it was a crazy little, nugget. The fact that they had a tournament for a queen being announced in a way. So just to throw a fun fact out there, actually clubs in Scotland at this point started adopting wearing numbers in the back of their shirts starting in 1945 on, and they became compulsory in 1960. But even with everybody having their numbers on their shirts, Robert Kelly, the Celtic chairman's, he was a very traditional man and, very idealistic, and had, his fundamentals, his traditions, his ideals. And he actually didn't want the famous green and white hoops to be disfigured. So he actually decided that Celtic would wear their numbers on their shorts. So that tradition actually went on to 1994, although number shirts were actually worn for European competitions from 1975 onwards. So funny enough, right? A fun fact that, they actually kind of held off wearing numbers on their shirts for the long. Imagine I always think about the love of the jersey, the love of the colors, the love of, wearing the green and white, and just being proud of, how your jersey looks, that you don't want to ruin it with a number. And, they would put their numbers on their shorts, and then actually at one point they kind of got forced to put the number on their jersey. So being petty, they actually put the number on the sleeve to kind of diminish the pain, or not the pain, but disfigurating the jersey even more. So fun fact about that. Shout out to Robert Kelly, a true traditionalist, and I think I can roll with that. I like traditions. I love little things like that. So shout out to Robert Kelly, the Celtic chairman in the 1940s. After that came a period of drought. McGrory was succeeded by former Celtic captain Jock Stein in 1965. He won the Scottish Cup in his first few months at the club, and then won the league title in the next season. So 1967 will roll around. Annus Mirabilis, marvelous year, miraculous year, wonderful year. Some of the translations to this Roman words that basically said, this was the year that every competition that Celtics entered, they won. They were the only European team to win the European treble and the only team to win the famed quadruple. And a lot of people, you can kind of see the treble, right? The Scottish League, the Scottish Cup, and then the Glasgow Cup. The Glasgow Cup was actually played amongst the team from Glasgow, which is 5 of them. And you're probably thinking, what is this quadruple? Obviously, quadruple means 4. What is this 4 title? And it's actually the European Cup. The Champions League of the year was won by Celtic. And that kind of gives us a little moment of history where this group of guys called the Lisbon Lions would come into the picture. So as we go into this, let's take a second and talk about these guys. Let's talk about what they did. Let's talk about the miracle. And let's talk about the 1967 Annus Mirabilis. Let's talk about the great year where Celtic came into the international picture and conquered the world with the Lisbon Lions. The Lisbon Lions. In May 25th, 1967, Estadio Nacional in Lisbon, Portugal. 45,000 fans in the stands. Missing Joe McBride, who suffered a long season knee injury. He was the Scottish top scorer with 35 goals in 26 appearances. Inter, on the other side, they also had an important loss. Ballon d'Or winner and Spanish international Luis Suarez, if you guys remember him from the Barcelona episode that we did, missed the match also with an injury. And then to add to this game, Inter was gearing up for a treble of their own. But they had lost a few matches going into this final, which was the semifinal of Coppa Italia, and the other was the race to win the Scudetto, which is the Italian league. This European Cup was their last chance to win a title this season that started off great for the Italians, but it was turning out to be a domestically bad one. But they had won 2 out of the 3 last European Cups, so they had the experience of being in the stage, by their side. That's what they had in their pocket. We have experience. We've been here before. We know what to do. On the other side, Celtic getting to their first European Cup final ever, but unlike Inter, Celtic had actually won all the domestic cups they had participating in. The Scottish Division 1, the Scottish Cup, the Scottish League Cup, and the Glasgow Cup. So, as we said, the picture for this, Champions League final, you had a team that is great or having a wonderful year in domestic cups, right? They won everything in Scotland. On the other side, you have Inter, who actually has lost everything domestically. And this European Cup is the only title that they're fighting for, and this is the redeeming quality or the redeeming chance for a lost year, basically, right? And then also, they had the experience. They've been here before. We've done this. 2 out of the last 3 years, we've been there. We competed. We won. We lifted titles. We know how it feels to be European champions. On the other side, Celtic, first time ever. Think about the nerves. Think about traveling to a neutral country, in Portugal, where you don't know what's gonna happen. But let's get a little bit into the game. So this game was also, and those, backstories, it also came down to a defensive game versus an attacking game. So Inter matches always had slim score lines and rarely conceded. Before their match, their manager, Jock Stein, said that Celtic will be the first team to bring the European Cup back to Britain. We are going to attack as we have never attacked before. So, like we said, on one side, Inter barely got scored on. And then Jock Stein, the manager of Celtic, said, you know what? We're going to attack like we have never before. We're going to go all out. We're going to win this. Somehow we're going to score as many goals as we can. So getting into the game, Inter scored after 7 minutes when Sandro Mazzola converted a penalty. Celtic equalized when Tommy Gemmell scored at the 63-minute mark. Steven Chalmers put the Celtic in the lead in the 84th minute. The match finished 2-1 for Celtic. It was said to be a victory for football because Celtic's attacking football overcame Inter's catenaccio, a defensive style which was considered to be a less attractive way of playing, but, it got you results. Celtic manager Jock Stein and his team received acclaim after the match and were given the nickname the Lisbon Lions. The victory made Celtic the first British team and the first team from Northern Europe to win the European Cup. Not only that, but it was the first team outside of Spain, Portugal, and Italy to win the European Cup, and the only Scottish team to reach the final to this day. So literally, they grabbed the Scottish flag, wrapped it around them, kind of painted green and white a little bit, and the Lisbon Lions were kind of born. And also a fun fact that I really love this fact because I don't think we see that anymore. I don't think we see that often anymore, but the Lisbon Lions were actually, every single player in that team was born within 30 miles of Glasgow. How insane is that? Not only were they Scottish, but they were hometown boys. They were the boys. Literally, like their nickname says, like they are the boys. This is considered to be the greatest side in club history. So, as we finish off 1967, the year where Scotland was basically represented by one team and one team only, which is Celtic, by the green and white. I'm sure Glasgow was painted two colors, which is green and white, that whole entire year. And not only that, but till this day, 2025, they are the only Scottish team to not only reach a final, but to win it. So shout out to the Lisbon Lions. Shout out to this great, how amazing is that? How piece of history. It's amazing. And let's get back to Celtic. So going back to Celtic would return to the European Cup final again in 1970, but this time they would lose to Feyenoord at the mythical San Siro in Milan. They would continue to dominate in the 1970s, in which they winning the Scottish Championships in 1974 was their 9th consecutive title in a row. And it would join MTK Budapest and CSK Sofia on a joint world record for consecutive titles it won in their respective leagues. The 80s were also pretty good for the green and white, and in their centenary season in the 1987-1988, the club celebrating 100 years of clubhood, they won a double in a Scottish Premier Division and the Scottish Cup. The 90s were a little troublesome, as the club was having financial issues and acquired a good amount of debt, but a Scottish-Canadian businessman, Fergus McCann, fought for the control of the club, and according to media reports, McCann took over the club minutes before it was to be declared bankrupt. We have a savior come in at the nick of time. McCann changed the structure of the club to a public limited company, and he was there to oversee the redevelopment of Celtic Park into a 60,832 all-seater stadium. But one thing that many also thank him for indirectly is when in 1998, under the Dutchman Wim Jansen as manager, Celtic won the league, which most importantly prevented their arch rivals Rangers from winning their 10th title in a row, which would be beating the 9 in a row record that both clubs had held at the time. You gotta love the pettiness, right? Because I've watched videos on Celtic and Rangers. I've watched videos on this matchup. And you gotta love the pettiness that, you know what? Hey, maybe we're not gonna win the title, but we're not gonna let them win it. So that's amazing. I love to hear rivalries like that. But with that being said, this is actually the perfect time to talk about one of the biggest rivalries in the entire soccer world, the Old Firm. The Old Firm is the name given to the rivalry between Celtic FC and Rangers FC. Another name is Glasgow Derby, but traditionally is known as the Old Firm. As we go a little bit deeper into the story of this derby, Celtic was largely supported by those of Irish Roman Catholic background that lived on the east side of the city. On the other hand, Rangers were actually traditionally supported largely by Protestant community, and for decades the club had an unwritten rule that they wouldn't sign players from the Catholic faith. Interesting there. Historically, Rangers supporters were native Scots and Ulster Scots that moved from southern Scotland or northern England. And that's why if you ever go to an Old Firm match, you'll probably see Celtic stands with Irish flags, and Rangers stands with the Union Jack flags, the traditional red, blue, and white British flag that you might see, around the world. So, fun fact there. By the time Celtic was founded in 1887, Rangers had been actually around for 15 years, so they're a little bit older than them. And during that time, both teams, they were friendly with each other. Hey, we're broskies, we're from the same town, we got to rep Glasgow. But Rangers actually had a tragedy happen in their stadium. We'll have an episode about Rangers as well, so we'll talk about that then. So Celtic, during that unfortunate tragedy, actually took over the sporting side of things, while Rangers was getting back on their feet. They were winning titles and stuff like that, as Rangers couldn't compete as much. In 1904, we see the first mention of the words or of the actual title of Old Firm, when a comic on a newspaper made fun of the fact that since both clubs and institutions around the clubs will benefit economically from such matches, with both teams being very popular, these people would leech basically out of the rivalry. They would commercialize it like crazy, as we see matches today, right? When you see La Liga, when you see all these Super Clásico or El Clásico, and all these companies come around and they make money. Like for example, in 1909, both teams drew twice, therefore replays kept getting played. Back in the day, if you drew in finals, it wasn't, you go to penalty spot, for kicks, you basically play another game. So, another game, guess what? Comes more selling of drinks, comes more selling of, I don't think they had cars in 1909, but, a lot of food and drinks and, just different things, tickets and stuff like that, these clubs could benefit from. So a lot of people thought, that they were kind of doing it on purpose in a way. Both teams will continue to make more money from the fans. They're so faithful with their support that they wouldn't even think twice about it. They wanted to see these matches. They wanted to support their clubs. Therefore, they were going to pay their hard-earned money to go support the clubs. Sometimes things would get a little bit wild. There was even riots from supporters where there were, multiple injuries, and a considerable amount of damage was done to Hampden Park. So Hampden Park, for those that don't know, is a neutral site where important matches will be played in Scotland, or at least in Glasgow. Think about Wembley Stadium in England, where basically the national team plays, or just finals are played. This is kind of the same thing in Scotland. Some politics aspect to this rivalry would also arise when a shipbuilder from Belfast will set up in Glasgow in 1912. Harland and Wolff was the name of the company, and they had an anti-Catholic hiring practice, which meant that hundreds of Ulster's Protestants will move to Glasgow and would be hired. And since they would set up on the western side of town, they would actually, adopt Rangers as a new club. And as we say, as the company didn't like Catholics, which are represented by Celtic, the rivalry would kind of spark up a little bit there. But there's also another event that actually made this rivalry, or the gap between both clubs, a little bit bigger. It was more tragic, more social, political, and it was actually called Easter Rising. Also known as the Easter Rebellion, was an armed insurrection in Ireland during Easter week in April of 1916. The rising was launched by Irish Republicans against the British rule in Ireland, with the aim of establishing the independent Irish Republic, while the United Kingdom was fighting the First World War. It was the most significant uprising in Ireland since the Revolution of 1798 and the first armed conflict of the Irish Revolution period. 16 of the rising's leaders were executed starting in May 1916. The nature of these executions and subsequent political development ultimately contributed to an increase in popular support for Irish independence. And of course, Celtic fans identifying themselves with, with the Irish struggle, the Irish uprising due to their roots, their Irish roots. And of course, Rangers on the other side of town, they were loyal to the British. They were loyal to the crown, and I think that also divided. Especially if you're a Celtic fan that has family that's maybe still lives in Ireland, or have your uncles or family members or whoever it may be, or just knowing that you came from there, right? And you kind of supported that, and obviously on the other side, Rangers fans had a different point of view, having this period of fighting and death, unfortunately, brought the political to the sporting side of things, unfortunately. Throughout the years, there were many violent encounters between both fan bases that would result in multiple and hundreds of arrests. For example, there was arrests in 1965 in the Scottish League Cup final, in the 1969 Scottish Cup final, and the 1977 Scottish Cup final. But in 1980, the Scottish Cup final at Hampden, after Celtic scored in extra time lifting the title, fans from both teams jumped into the pitch and proceeded to clash and fistfight in the middle of the field. One side launched first to one side, and then the other fans got into the field and they pushed back, and then actually police and horseback had to come in and started to push both supporters back. Honestly, I watched videos this happened in the 80s, so you can literally go to YouTube and watch it, and it's crazy to see, the amount of people kind of running one way and then they go the other way, and then the police and horses in the middle of a soccer field, of a football field, try to push these people, away and just kind of stay in your corner. You stay in your corner. It was a crazy visual. Until this day, actually, this remains as one of the worst pitch invasions onto a football pitch ever reported, and authorities said that alcohol was the instrumental piece of this event. Therefore, alcohol was banned from all football grounds of Scotland. So if you're a Scottish fan, if you're a Scottish football fan and you miss having a beer in the stadium, I guess you can say thank you to Celtic and Rangers supporters. Now we're making light of it, but I'm sure it sucks. In 1994, the Rangers chairmen tried to ban Celtic fans because of the repeated acts of vandalism to the Ranger Stadium, and Celtic wouldn't want to take financial responsibility for it. So basically, a game would be played at Ranger Stadium, Celtic fans would go away, they would, destroy little things or two, and then Rangers would be like, hey, who's going to pay for this? And then, the front office of Celtic or the owners or whoever, the chairman, they would be like, hey, we didn't do it. It was our fans, but, it wasn't us. I'm sure there was a little infighting between, institutions as well, not only just the fans. Only one match was played with the ban in place before the Scottish Football League passed a resolution to the problem to hope to ease their troubles for all clubs. Another change that would come out of this rivalry was the time of the day when the Old Firm would be played. In May of 1999, at Celtic Park, there was a match played on a Sunday night, which meant that both fan bases had a full weekend to drink before the game. And since Rangers had good chances of clinching the title with a victory, and it seemed like they would win the match, and not only would they win the match, they would do it in their opponent's stadium, the Celtic supporters started throwing objects into the pitch, and which one actually ended up hitting the referee with a coin. Shout out to his arm, not for the violence, but the fact that he actually had great aim, and he actually forced the referee to get medical treatments. Imagine how hard the coins are in Scotland. Not only that, but at least 4 Celtic fans invaded the pitch to confront the ref during the game, and they had to be stopped from getting close to the referee. And the Rangers will end up winning 3-0, and the game would actually end up with the title of the shame game. So obviously a lot of shameful things happen, but tensions, I'm sure it was kind of wild that year, or that game specifically. Because of that game, because of what happened there, because of the, quote unquote shame game, the league decided to move the All Firm to early afternoon matches and made sure that the possibility of an All Firm title decider can be avoided at all costs. I mean, let's be honest. Who puts the last game to be a freaking, derby match between the two biggest rivalries when one of them could win the title? I'm sure they didn't plan it like that, but it ended up being like that. So they kind of moved that away. And also, if you're expecting an All Firm on a Sunday night, you probably won't get that ever again. There are hundreds, should I say thousands of stories and videos all over the internet about the Old Firm, but this was a little glimpse of that rivalry, so let's go back to Celtic. So going back to Celtic, in June of 2000, Martin O'Neill came in as manager and won 3 out of 5 Scottish Premier Leagues. In his first season as manager, he actually won the domestic treble, becoming the second Celtic manager to do so behind Jock Stein. In 2003, Celtic made it to the UEFA Cup final, modern named Europa League. They would face Porto from Portugal, but unfortunately they would lose 3-2 after extra time. But this match will be remembered by the world because around 80,000, yes, you heard that right, 80,000 Celtic fans traveled to Seville, Spain to support Celtic. Actually, for this, Celtic fans were awarded by both FIFA and UEFA, with the Fair Play Award for their extraordinary, loyal, and sporting behavior. Can you imagine? Honestly, when I was reading this, I was like, Celtic fans are crazy, bro. There is no way you can take 80,000 people to a random city in Spain. You're literally taking a town of people, 80,000. I live in Texas, a small city in Texas, where I think the population here is about 5,500 or maybe 6,000 people. Can you imagine an influx of 80,000 people coming to your city for one game? That's insane, but shout out to Celtic fans on that one. In 2005, O'Neill was replaced by Gordon Strachan. Sorry, Mr. Gordon, and won the Scottish Premier League title in his first year in charge. After that, he became the third Celtic manager to win 3 titles in a row. Strachan will get Celtic to their first Champions League knockout stage in 2006-2007, and then again in the 2007-2008, but would leave the club in 2009 after failing to win the Scottish Premier League title. Tony Mowbray will take over, only to be succeeded a year later by Neil Lennon, under which they would set a Scottish Premier League record for the biggest win in the league history when they beat Aberdeen 9-0 at Celtic Park. Lennon was in charge for 4 seasons, in which he managed through the 125th anniversary of the club, which they celebrated with a 2 victory against Barcelona, out of all people, in a Champions League game. And this actually helped them reach the round of 16. So a wonderful, stupendous night. I mean, not only are you celebrating 125 years of your club, but you're beating probably one of the best soccer teams to have ever played. The Barcelona in that year was amazing. In the early 2010s, insane. They would finish the season with a Scottish Premier League title and a Scottish Cup double. And Fraser Foster, Celtic goalkeeper, will set a new record in the season of 1,256 minutes without conceding a goal in a league match. Ronnie Deila would take over in 2014 after Lennon and went on to win two league titles in a League Cup, but with bad results in the European competitions and an elimination from the Scottish Cup by Rangers, he announced that he would leave the club after the season was over. In 2016, Brendan Rodgers would take over and the club would turn around and go on a crazy run. In November of 2016, Celtic would lift their 100th trophy after defeating Aberdeen 3-0 in the League Cup final. Then in April of 2017, they would clinch their 6th successive league title with 8 games to spare and finally finish the season with a record of 106 points and would become the first Scottish side to compete in a top-flight league season undefeated since Rangers did it in 1899. So talk about breaking records. That is a record of 118 years. Just in case you were keeping count, Rangers had a title of being undefeated in 1899. Not even, literally a whole century had to happen in between for that record to be broken. Shout out to Celtic once again for breaking records, crazy records. Also in 2017, they would again beat Aberdeen, poor Aberdeen, 2-1 in the Scottish Cup final to clinch their 4th treble. Their result will see Celtic go an entire domestic season unbeaten. The unbeaten run will bleed into the next season, and after 69 games, breaking their own 100-year-old record of 62 games unbeaten, Celtic will lose to Hearts in November of 2017. This is the record that we talked about in the beginning of the episode, 100 years in between as well. Celtic of the 2017 they were good. They were good. 2016, 2017, good years. They would go on to beat Motherwell in the League Cup final for another trophy and eventually clinch their 7th consecutive league title in April of 2018. Once again, they would face Motherwell in 2018 Scottish Cup final, and with the win, they would win another domestic treble. So the double treble. The first club in Scotland to do so. So imagine not only winning a treble, but doing it 2 years in a row. Insane. Rodgers got the call from the English club Leicester City mid-season, and Neil Lennon came back to finish the rest of the season, in which he helped Celtic win in a precedented 3rd consecutive domestic treble. The treble. These men are insane. They just can't stop winning. Defeating Hearts 2-1 in the 2019 Scottish Cup final. After being confirmed the full-time manager, Lennon would help Celtic win their 10th consecutive domestic trophy when they beat Rangers 1-0 in the Scottish League Cup final. 2020 would come around, and with a 13-point lead, and obviously due to COVID-19 pandemic, the Scottish League was suspended in March, and in April, the league board decided that a full league wasn't going to be possible, so they decided to give the title to Celtic. So there goes another trophy. And after being delayed, the Scottish Cup would finally take place in the winter, and Celtic would beat Hearts in penalty kicks for the 4th successive treble. I don't know what to say. They just keep winning. And 2020-2021 campaign actually wouldn't be a good one for them. They would go have poor performances in Europe. They would get knocked out of the League Cup by Ross County. And by February of 2021, they were 18 points behind Rangers, which meant the dreams of going 10 in a row would be crushed. That 10 in a row is just kind of staying away from everybody. Later that month, Lennon would resign, and assistant manager John Kennedy would be the one to take over the spot as interim manager. They would get knocked out by Rangers out of the Scottish Cup, and it would be their first season since 2010 that Celtic will go trophyless in a season. So we went from the highs of highs to the lows of lows. As we step forward to today, on April 26, 2025, Celtic actually would beat Dundee United in a 5-0 victory to secure their 4th title on the run. And I wonder if they're going to push to make, I don't know, will they be able in 2030? Can we look back at this episode and say, finally somebody won 10 years in a row? I don't know. We would have to check and see 5 years from now. And with that, we have looked at the story of a legendary giant in Scotland. But don't forget that every batch tells a story, and here at History Football Club, we have just scratched the surface. If you enjoyed today's journey through football's past, follow the show, leave a review, share it with someone who still believes in the beautiful game. My name is Cristian Putelias, and this is History Football Club, where football is history in motion.